Howdy folks, and welcome to my empire journey. Now, obviously setting up a wood shop in your garage at home, such as what I've got here, is a lot different than setting up a wood shop in industry where you have a dedicated space for this. Now, this is a multi-purpose garage. I've got automotive tools in here, I've got stores of other equipment, including strollers, some very heavy duty equipment there. I've got my general yard work stuff, and I've got my woodworking stuff as well. Now, all of my tools are put onto casters, and this allows me to move them around. But let's take a look around the shop first. Let's see what I've got and how I've stored these tools in the most effective, space efficient manner that I can to allow me to continue to park a car in the winter, still function in the garage, and get all of my tools set up in a neat and orderly manner so that I'm not tripping over things as I'm trying to work. Alright, so on this side of the garage, I've got a lot of my equipment stored. Up here on the top shelf, this is where all of my woodworking jigs are. So my crosscut sleds, I've got some nice, it's a gear crank finger joint sled. What else do I have up there? I've got a tenoning jig so that I can set up my hand router and I can make some tenons with that. Down in the bottom corner, tucked in this area here, this is actually storage for a lot of my large dimensional lumber, my really good product. I'm not too sure if you can see, but right behind this orange pail, I've got about a 12-foot section of mahogany that I plan on turning into a couple end tables. Right behind me, right here, I've got my benchtop mortiser, and it is sitting right on top of my router table. Okay. Behind my router table is my plywood, my sheet goods, and then on the shelving right over here, I've actually got some of my clamps being stored. And then behind these cushions here, this is actually where all of my woodworking hand tools are, and I've got them set up in a toolbox. It's a portable toolbox, so I can literally just pick it up and go. I find it really handy to have all of my tools in his toolbox like that, because I often do contracting work for customers where I come in and I'll fix their kitchen cabinets for them. And having all of my tools right there in a box to go, I find to be really handy. Alright, so most wood shops need a table saw. With the limited space that I have in here, you're going to notice that I don't actually have a workbench. And that's because I've decided to build this top onto my table saw. Now, this acts as two things. First off, it's a protective cover so that when it is in storage, I'm not putting anything onto the actual surface of the table saw itself. I'm not marring it, I'm not putting stains into it, I'm not putting watermarks onto it, things like that. So it protects the surface and it doubles as my workbench. So when I finish machining up my product, I put the cover back on, and then that cover becomes my workbench where I then glue on top of and I do all of my assembly. So I've increased the efficiency of my garage by taking the largest tool that I have, my table saw, and turning it into the second largest piece of equipment in your shop, which is your workbench. By having two in one like this, it really gives me a lot of flexibility into what I can do with my shop. It means I do have to be a little bit more organized when it comes to management of my material. I don't like putting solid wood onto the ground. So with something like that, I typically end up bringing in a Costco folding table, and I have my pieces of wood laid out on the folding table until I am ready to go for the assembly. In terms of this shelf behind me, right here where my hand is, that's all my fasteners. These are some really nice bins you can find, again, at your local Home Depot, Home Hardware, Home Improvement store. They've got all of my fasteners in them. And it's just organized into nice, neat, easy to find trays. I put screws in. When I'm done, when I remove a handful of screws, I don't put them back in. Once the screw leaves the bin, to me, it's either used or it's garbage. And that's so that I don't mess up and I don't misplace the wrong screw into the wrong container. Because there's nothing worse than you need a short screw, and when you reach in and grab a handful, you get a long screw and you put a screw straight through the surface of your project, and now you've just gone and wrecked several hours of your work and causing you a lot of grief and a lot of rework to do to either fix it or redo it. Alright, last thing on this wall, I've got my thickness planer. This is a benchtop thickness planer. I obviously don't have a dedicated workbench that I use for cabinet making, so I've put my benchtop thickness planer onto a set of casters, and that allows me to roll it around. If I need, I can lift it up off the casters, place it onto my table saw with the protective cover on, and then I can use the thickness planer at a nice working height. Now, this is one of the most important things in my shop. It's a portable dust collection system. Dust collection is extremely important. Sawdust is extremely carcinogenic and can cause cancer of the lungs if you are inhaling it. A lot of homeowners, when they set up a shop at their own, completely neglect a dust collection system. It gets quite hard to breathe when you start machining up, you start sanding, you're on the table saw, a router, anything like that, and you start sending dust particulates into the air. A lot of people have complained that they're allergic to sawdust. Newsflash, everybody is allergic to sawdust. It's not meant to be in our lungs. Keep it out of your lungs. This cost me about $300 to pick up. One of the best purchases I've ever made. I'm actually looking at upgrading it, because right now I can only hook up one tool to the dust collector at a time. So what that means is I set up a piece of equipment, table saw for instance, I hook up my dust collector, turn the dust collector on, turn the table saw on, go to work, table saw shuts down, dust collector shuts down, then I need to go do some work on a bandsaw, I reconnect the dust collector to my bandsaw, start it up, turn the bandsaw on, etc, etc, etc. I am constantly adjusting and tweaking my tools, setting one tool up, finishing what I need to do, taking it down, and setting another tool up. This obviously doesn't go into a very efficient or flow efficient shop, but keep in mind, this is a multi-purpose shop. This is not a industrial wood shop where it's set up dedicated to do cabinet making. This is a home shop in a garage where I'm looking at doing automotive work, cabinet making, welding, a whole bunch of different hobbies that I do here at home, all at the same time out of one facility. Okay, now at the beginning of the video, I gave you a nice big overview of my garage, and then I've previously said that I don't have a dedicated workbench for me to work at. Yet I've got this sitting here behind me. Not all workbenches are created equal. This is not a woodworking bench. This is actually a really horribly designed bench in order to do woodworking. And I say that because you don't have the physical space on it nor around it to be able to properly assemble furniture. When you're looking at a bench for woodworking, ideally, you want access to all four sides, and you don't want a valance or a top on it like this, where I've got two tiers. All that's going to do is interfere with your product. You can't properly use the bench. You have nowhere to really clamp it. This is a metal vise, not a wood vise. So if I were to use this for clamping and holding my wood, all I'm going to do is damage it and cause myself more grief and more work by using that. Also, it's quite cluttered with a whole bunch of electrical equipment, and it's just not appropriate. Alright, this is the last wall that I've got in the garage. That's 3 walls that we've been taking a look at. Right behind me, right here, I've got my drill press. I actually found this one at a garage sale for $90. It was a steal of a deal. Not the greatest of drill presses, but at home to have a full height pillar drill press is quite rare. Behind me, I've got a big toolbox. That's all of my automotive tools. Okay? I said this is a multi-purpose facility. This toolbox is strictly there just for working on all of the cars. Behind me over here, I've got a miter saw. Again, it's a really nice quality miter saw. I love the portable stand to it. It's one of the tools that you use typically at the beginning of your project, and then you tug it away into the corner, and I use it for rough cutting my material to my rough lengths, and then I do all of my finishing cuts on the table saw. So having it on a portable stand instead of permanently set up, I find to be very useful. Right in the far corner over here, I've got a creeper for working on vehicles, and then up in the corner, I've got my my air compressor. Okay, that is a remote satellite tank, and then the actual air compressor sits underneath of the workbench. So I need more volume of air than what one compressor can do. So I have 2 tanks, 1 compressor with a tank, and 1 tank. That allows me to use a lot of air tools for a longer duty cycle than if I were to just run a single air compressor. Underneath of the air compressor, you'll see a blue bar right here. That's a desiccant dryer. Okay? When you compress air, you get a lot of water vapor into it. If you push that water vapor through your air tools, you end up rusting out the internals of your air tools, and you wreck the tools, and you really shorten their life. I run all of my air through a desiccant dryer, so it pulls all of that moisture, all of that water out of the compressed air, and I get a clean, dry air, as well as lubricating all of my air tools before use. Really extends the life of my tools and saves me a lot of cash. Right. Now, setting up a garage at home, a couple considerations, like I said, that I want to keep in mind. I want to be able to continue to walk from that door out my main garage door behind me. So I need a pathway in order for me to walk through without tripping on things. Now, in order to create a pathway, I kind of have to try and figure out where the tools are. Luckily for me, all of my tools are in casters and are easy to move, so I can actually start pulling them out, rearranging them, setting them up, positioning them to how I like. The other consideration is I have to run power to all of my tools, which means I'm probably going to be running extension cords. I really don't want to trip on those, so I'm going to have to pay special attention to where I'm running my power so that I'm not tripping over the cords as I'm trying to operate a table saw. So, let's get right into it. I'm going to start with placing my table saw here. Don't know if this is a final position, but with it being my biggest tool as well as my workbench, I want to make sure I've got room all the way around it to work on. As well, I need to make sure I've got room behind me to be able to fit material, and in front of me to be able to pass material through. So I'm going to go ahead and take this cover off, and let's get this table set up. Alright, so the table top is quite easy to remove. All I have to do is pick up one edge, and then I can slide it off. Now that the tabletop is removed, I can just move this over to the side, and I can forget about it until I'm ready to do some assembly work. Alright, a couple of you may have seen that I pulled these pieces of wood out from behind my table saw. Now, these are special pieces of wood because a lot of times what you'll find is you need an outfeed table. What I mean by that is your material is often long enough that by the time it comes back behind the table saw, it's starting to drop down, lifting the backside of your piece of wood up, which can cause a kickback. You can counter this by creating a table that's the same height as your table saw, and that supports the wood. I've gone ahead and created an outfeed table for my table saw that actually folds down behind it so that when I'm storing it flat against the wall, it's not interfering with anything. This was a piece of scrap plywood that I created, and it braces off of the table saw itself in order to support the outfeed table. So let's go ahead and get these installed. That's one leg installed, and I just have to go around to the other side and do the other leg. And just like that, I've increased the working area of my table saw, creating more efficiency for me. Now, this table saw is a little crooked in the shop, so I'm going to go ahead and straighten it up at this point. Alright, here's the table saw from the other side. You can see that I've got it braced across the bottom of the table saw on the mobile stand itself, and all I'm using is a couple pieces of wood to prop that table up to extend my usable work surface. Okay, now one of the next most commonly used tools for me at home is my jointer and my thickness planer. Now my thickness planer is quite low, so I keep it tucked aside until I actually need it. But I can go ahead and set my jointer up and get that ready to go, ready to start work. So I've got my jointy set up. It's not actually where I wanted it to be, but I forgot I had hung this tennis ball. Now this tennis ball is there so that when I park my vehicle, I know how far forward I can go. So that's something I'm going to have to look at. I might actually end up taking that down while I'm working in the garage so that I'm not turning around and then hitting my head on a tennis ball while I'm carrying something. Not ideal to me. Alright, the last tool I'm going to set up is actually going to be the miter saw. And I say the last tool because a lot of the other tools come into during the joinery and the finishing of the project, and I don't need them at the beginning. So right now I'm looking at setting up for an S4S, which is my basic function. So that means I need to get the miter saw. Now the miter saw can be quite difficult to collect the dust off. So typically what I do is I like to set it up so that the back side of the miter saw is facing out of my garage, that all of the sawdust goes out, and then a nice breeze brings it back in, allowing me to collect up at the end of the day. Okay. I don't want it shooting into the back corner because all of the sawdust then shoots right up against the wall, buries into the corners, and then it becomes harder to get the dust out of those corners. So let's go ahead and pull it out and let's get this thing set up. Okay, I talked about having tools set up on casters and in a way that allows you to easily move them around. This is one of those tools. It's really quick and easy for me to set up. I've got a nice red handle here. All I do is pull on that, and then I push down. It's locked into place. Then I've got a couple tabs that I clip in, and the tool is now fully set up. I can now position this quite easily to where I want it to be. Right now I've got it set up right there. We're ready to start machining in this shop. Alright, so I've taken the design from that crude sketch that I did in the shop just to get a overall concept, and I plugged away at it in a program called Google SketchUp. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to take this design and I'm going to start creating a set of blueprints from it. So what I've done is I've taken the cabinet door here off of it, and all I'm going to do is I'm going to grab my blueprinting tool, or sorry, not my blueprinting tool, my dimension tool, and I'm going to start looking at the angles, looking at what I need to actually reference, because keep in mind, once you get into the shop, you're not going to have access to this 3D model anymore. So all the work you do now in terms of setting up, getting the dimensions, is all you're going to have access to. And it can be really easy once you get into the shop and to start actually working and machining, to realize you forgot to dimension something. You either have to come back in to reference it, or even worse, you completely forget to put a detail in, and it ends up resulting in a piece being ruined because you cut something out when it should have been left. In terms of a tenon, you might accidentally cut a tenon off if you zoom in too closely. So this is the side panel, the upright, or the vertical upright, I should say, that I have designed for the project. You can see I am dimensioning it. Those holes in the middle there, that is for the hinges. Now I'm using a Richelieu hinge. It's based off a Systems 32 for the adjustable shelves. You see this most in IKEA furniture, where you have the small little holes for the adjustable shelves. They are in fact exactly 32 millimeters apart, and that's where the name Systems 32 comes from. So what I'm doing here is I'm giving myself an overall length, and I'm going to I'm not worrying about the width because all of this is going to be made out of 3/4 inch plywood. So I'm not worried about the width of the material, but I need to know the width of it and the length of it, not the thickness. This is a groove that I've got cut into the back of it. That's going to accept a tongue that's going to be holding up the French cleat. Now you can see that's a fairly big groove that I'm cutting out of there. That's an inch thick. So it's a fairly stout tongue that's getting put into the upright on this. And that's so that this French cleat can transfer all of the weight from the entire cabinet
and the dartboard, which keep in mind is going to swing off. So there's going to be a lot of racking motion on this because there's going to be a lot of external weight and a lot of weight far away from the cabinet. It's all being held on by a single French cleat. There's no fasteners going to be physically mounting this cabinet to the wall. It's all based off of gravity and a 45-degree miter. It's an incredibly strong joint, but with as much weight as I have on the exterior, I need a very strong tongue that's going to hold it up. So what I'm doing right now is dimensioning where I want the hole. And I'm not going to dimension to the top or the bottom of the hole because I have to do a calculation. When I go to make this, I want to know where the center of my hole is. And kind of eyeballing it there, that looks to be a little off center. I'm not going to trust my measurement from visual though. I am going to check it. I've got 4 directions that I'll check it in, and it does look like I'm off. So I'm going to just slightly tweak that a little bit so that I get the proper dimensioned spot. Gives me the center point of my circle, and it allows me to drill it. Now those holes are going 10 millimeters deep approximately. I have the hinges being shipped in the mail, so I'm not actually going to drill those until I can get a test piece, check the drill depth that I need to do, and trial the hinge in a scrap piece before I put it into my final project. Once I've tested it, then I'll be comfortable to insert the hinge hole on this project. Now, one thing you can't see right now is at the top and the bottom, there is a rabbet joint on this piece. And if I were to try and zoom out right now and show you the entire, yeah, there you go. Okay, so I'm zooming out. If you noticed at the top, it became unlegible to get the entire piece in one picture. So what's going to happen is I'm going to have to create a series of screenshots to get the pieces dimensioned up. And I'll put the screenshots into this video so that you can see what I thought were appropriate. Alright, now that all the blueprinting, the designs, and the shop is all set up, it's time to get into the shop and actually start working on this project. So let's go pull some wood out and let's go make some sawdust.